I'm Leo, the youngest child in a family that revolved around chaos disguised as creativity. My parents, Emily and Victor, were self-proclaimed artists. They weren't famous or even moderately successful, but they acted as if their work was the pinnacle of artistic genius. Their lives revolved around sculpting, painting, and hosting pretentious gallery nights where their equally struggling friends would sip cheap wine and lament how society failed to appreciate their brilliance. I grew up in this world of paint-streaked walls, cluttered studios, and mismatched furniture. To my parents, their craft always came first, before bills, before structure, and definitely before parenting. I don't think they ever wanted children, not really. My sister Anna was an accident, and my mom didn't hesitate to say so, even joking once that Anna ruined her body. I was born 5 years later, and by then, they'd embraced the idea of a family, but only because I became their living, breathing art project. From the start, I was the favored one. I didn't ask for it, but I didn't question it either. I was too young to understand what was happening. To me, the praise and attention felt natural, as if it were my birthright. My parents gushed over me endlessly, calling me beautiful, charismatic, and so talented. Every picture they hung on the walls or displayed at their gallery openings featured me, smiling like the golden child they believed I was. Anna, on the other hand, barely existed in their world. She was too quiet, too plain, too unlike the artistic vision they wanted for our family. She was invisible, except when she was inconvenient. Anna was different. She wasn't interested in art or theatrics. She preferred books and schoolwork. While I ran around the house making messes my parents thought were charming, she stayed in her small room trying to avoid the chaos. Even when she achieved something incredible, like winning writing contests or earning top grades, our parents barely noticed. I didn't understand it then, but my parents couldn't see value in anything they couldn't flaunt to their friends. My achievements, however small, were celebrated because they fit their narrative of having a perfect son. A drawing I scribbled on the back of a receipt would get framed and praised as raw talent, while Anna's carefully crafted essays were dismissed as boring. It wasn't just about recognition. It was about how they treated her versus me. Take birthdays, for example. Every year, my parties were extravagant affairs with balloons, cakes, and gifts stacked high. They even hired a magician one year to perform tricks for my friends. Anna, she got none of that. One of my earliest memories is of her birthday when I was 6. My parents handed her a $20 bill, told her to buy something for herself, and then spent the rest of the day discussing my upcoming art showcase at school. Even then, I could sense her disappointment. She never said anything, but the way her shoulders sagged and her eyes dimmed stuck with me. Still, I didn't question it. Why would I? I was a child soaking up the love and attention, blissfully unaware of how one-sided it all was. As I got older, the divide between us only grew. Anna was often the target of my parents' criticism. If she wore clothes that didn't match their idea of what a proper young lady should wear, they'd make snide comments. If she didn't smile enough, they'd accuse her of being ungrateful for all they'd done for her. They never stopped to consider why she acted the way she did. She wasn't ungrateful. She was neglected. Every snide remark, every dismissal pushed her further into herself. I wish I had seen it then, but I was too busy basking in the glow of their favoritism. The worst part was that Anna didn't even try to compete. She didn't fight back or demand more. She simply withdrew, as if accepting her place in the family as the unwanted child. She spent most of her time in her room reading, and when she did come out, she kept her head down and her words were few. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was a kid, wrapped up in my own world. But looking back now, I realize how lonely she must have been. She didn't have any close friends to confide in, and our parents certainly weren't going to offer her any support. The house we grew up in wasn't a home for Anna. It was a prison she couldn't wait to escape. My parents always thought of themselves as progressive and enlightened, but they were blind to the damage they caused. They saw themselves as visionaries raising a child prodigy, me, and an unfortunate burden. Anna? Their favoritism wasn't subtle. It was glaringly obvious, even to outsiders. I remember one art show when I was about 9. My parents had filled the gallery with family photos as part of a multimedia piece they were presenting. Every picture featured me, playing, laughing, posing for the camera. Anna wasn't in a single one. A guest noticed and asked, "Don't you have another child?" My mom laughed it off, saying, "Oh, Anna doesn't really photograph well." That memory haunts me now. At the time, I didn't understand how cruel those words were. But as I grew older, I started to see the cracks in the image my parents had built around me. Anna was resilient in ways I didn't appreciate back then. Despite everything, she excelled in school, worked part-time jobs, and saved every penny she earned. I think she always knew she wouldn't be able to rely on our parents for support. While I was given everything without asking, Anna had to fight for every scrap of independence. Her graduation day was the turning point for our family. Instead of celebrating her achievement, my parents handed her an eviction notice. It wasn't a surprise to her, she'd been expecting it, but it shocked me. I didn't understand why they were pushing her out so quickly. "Anna needs to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet," my dad said casually, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. Meanwhile, I was allowed to stay. I hadn't even finished high school yet, and I wasn't contributing anything to the household, but that didn't matter. I was their golden child, their prized possession. They never would have dreamed of kicking me out. When Anna packed her bags and left, I didn't stop her. I didn't even say goodbye properly. Part of me felt relieved. I wouldn't have to deal with the tension between her and our parents anymore. But another part of me felt a pang of guilt I couldn't explain. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself it wasn't my fault. I was just a kid. But now, I know better. I was complicit in her suffering, even if I didn't realize it. When Anna left, the house felt quieter, but not in a comforting way. It was like something essential had gone missing, and no one wanted to acknowledge it. My parents carried on as if nothing had happened. They didn't talk about her, didn't wonder aloud where she'd gone, or how she was doing. It was as if she had never existed. At first, I convinced myself that it didn't matter. Anna had always been withdrawn, keeping to herself and avoiding family gatherings. Her absence should have been insignificant, but it wasn't. Even though I couldn't fully articulate it at the time, I missed her. She was the only other person in the house who wasn't caught up in my parents' web of delusions. Without her, the house felt heavier. Still, I tried to enjoy my position as the golden child. My parents continued to dote on me, praising even my smallest achievements. If I got a B on a test, they acted like I'd won a Pulitzer. If I doodled on the back of a napkin, they'd frame it and call it modern art. Yet, even as they lavished me with attention, cracks started to form. I could feel it in the way they watched me, their expectations piling up like bricks on my shoulders. They didn't just want me to succeed, they needed me to succeed. Their dreams of artistic greatness, which they hadn't been able to achieve themselves, were now pinned squarely on my shoulders. My parents' world revolved around appearances. Every gallery night, every social gathering, every carefully curated Instagram post was designed to project an image of success. They didn't want to admit that their art wasn't selling or that they were struggling financially. Instead, they threw themselves into promoting me as their protege, their proof that they were still relevant. At first, I didn't mind. It felt good to be the center of attention, to be the one they bragged about to their friends. But as I got older, I started to realize how conditional their love was. They didn't care about who I was as a person, only about what I could represent for them. When I was 17, they began pressuring me to follow in their footsteps. They wanted me to take over their art business, to become the face of their brand. It didn't matter that I had dreams of my own. "You have a gift, Leo," my mom would say, her voice dripping with the kind of intensity that made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "You can't waste it on something ordinary." Ordinary. That was their biggest fear. Not failure, but mediocrity. And to them, anything outside of their narrow definition of success was mediocre. As I struggled under the weight of their expectations, I began to think more about Anna. I wondered what she was doing, where she was, and how she was surviving without any support from them. I felt guilty, though I wasn't sure why. It wasn't like I had been the one to push her out. But I had stayed silent, hadn't I? I'd watched as they dismissed her achievements, criticized her appearance, and ignored her feelings. The worst part was, I hadn't just stayed silent. I'd believed them. I'd believed that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't belong. And now, without her around, I was starting to see the truth. I began to resent my parents, though I kept it to myself. How could they treat their own child like she was disposable? How could they kick her out and pretend it was for her own good? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, not just at them, but at myself for not standing up for her. As time went on, my parents' carefully curated world began to crumble. Their art wasn't selling, and their debts were piling up. They tried to hide it, but the signs were obvious. Bills went unpaid, arguments became more frequent, and the once lively gallery nights grew sparse. I was no longer the carefree golden child. I became their emotional crutch, their sounding board, and their scapegoat when things went wrong. "Why aren't you helping us more?" my dad snapped one night after I told him I couldn't skip school to help them set up for an event. "Your sister would have done it if she were here?" The irony of that statement hit me like a punch to the gut. They had kicked Anna out, all but erased her from their lives, and now they had the audacity to use her as a benchmark for my behavior. The pressure only got worse. They started asking me to do more around the house, to contribute financially, even though I was still in school. At one point, my mom suggested I quit college and focus on helping them rebuild their business. "It's your future too, Leo," she said, as if tying my entire life to their sinking ship was somehow a privilege. For the first time, I started to understand what Anna must have felt all those years: the suffocating weight of their expectations, the constant guilt-tripping, the knowledge that no matter how much you gave, it would never be enough. One night, after another argument about money, I found myself thinking about Anna again. She had escaped this. She had found a way out. I envied her for that, but I also felt a deep sense of loss. She was my sister, and I had let her down. I decided to reach out. It had been years since we'd spoken, and I wasn't sure if she'd even want to hear from me, but I needed to talk to someone who understood, someone who had been through what I was going through now. I found her number tucked away in an old notebook and hesitated before dialing. When she answered, her voice was cautious, almost wary. "Anna, it's me. Leo," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it's been a long time, but I need to talk to you." There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up, but then she sighed and said, "What do you want, Leo?" Her tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. It was the voice of someone who had built walls around herself, someone who had learned not to expect anything from the people who were supposed to care about her. I told her everything about our parents' financial troubles, their attempts to guilt me into taking on their responsibilities, and how I was starting to feel like a pawn in their game. "They want me to help them sell their art online," I said. "They even suggested I drop out of school to focus on the family business." Anna laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "That sounds about right," she said. "They've always been good at using people." Talking to Anna was like opening a floodgate. For the first time, I felt like someone truly understood what I was going through. She didn't sugarcoat anything or try to make me feel better about our parents, but she did offer me something I hadn't expected: perspective. "You don't have to stay, Leo," she said. "You don't owe them anything. They'll never stop taking from you if you let them." Her words hit me hard. I had spent my entire life trying to meet our parents' expectations, trying to earn their approval. But Anna was right. They would never stop. They would take and take until there was nothing left of me. That night, for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I didn't have to be their golden child. Maybe I could be something else, something more. After my call with Anna, I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. "You don't owe them anything." Those words echoed in my mind every time my parents asked me to do something, every time they tried to guilt me into stepping up. It was like a veil had been lifted, and I could finally see the truth. Their love wasn't unconditional. It was transactional. They didn't see me as their son. They saw me as an investment. As long as I was useful, helping with the art shows, managing their social media, or even just being their living, breathing proof of success, I had value to them. But if I failed, if I decided I didn't want to be their golden child anymore, I doubted they'd see me as anything at all. The more I thought about Anna, the more the tension in the house grew. My parents could sense I was pulling away. I started saying no more often. Small things at first, like refusing to skip a class to help them with errands, or turning down their requests to design promotional materials for their art. But every no felt like a small rebellion, and their reactions only confirmed what Anna had told me. My mom would sigh dramatically, her hand pressed to her forehead like she was on the verge of collapse. "Leo, we've given you everything. Is it so much to ask for a little help in return?" My dad was less theatrical, but more cutting. "You're ungrateful," he'd say, shaking his head. "We've sacrificed so much for you, and this is how you repay us?" At first, their guilt trips worked. I'd cave, apologizing and promising to do better. But over time, I started to see their manipulation for what it was. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding obedience. I began calling Anna more often, seeking her advice and perspective. She was patient with me, but she didn't sugarcoat anything. "They're never going to change, Leo," she said during one call. "They don't see you as a person. They see you as a means to an end. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start making decisions for yourself." "But they're my parents," I argued, feeling the weight of decades of conditioning. "I can't just walk away." "You can," Anna replied firmly. "I did, and I'm better for it." Her words stayed with me, even though I wasn't ready to act on them yet. I wanted to believe there was still hope for my parents, that they could change if I just tried hard enough. But the more I tried to reason with them, the more I realized that Anna was right. They weren't interested in changing. Things came to a head one evening when my parents called a family meeting. I knew it wasn't going to be good when I saw the strained look on my mom's face and the tight set of my dad's jaw. "We've been talking," my dad began, his tone grave, "and we've decided it's time for you to take on more responsibility around here." "What do you mean?" I asked, already bracing myself. "We're struggling, Leo," my mom said, her voice quivering. "The gallery isn't bringing in as much money as it used to, and we need your help to keep things afloat." "What kind of help?" I pressed, though I already knew the answer. My dad didn't mince words. "We need you to quit school and focus on the family business." "Full time?" I stared at them, my heart pounding. They weren't just asking me to help out. They were asking me to give up my future. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "No," my mom repeated, her eyes wide with shock. "I'm not quitting school," I said more firmly this time. "I've worked too hard to get here. I'm not giving it up." My dad's face turned red. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Do you have any idea how much we've sacrificed to give you a good life?" Anna's words flashed through my mind. "You don't owe them anything. You didn't sacrifice for me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "You sacrificed for yourselves. This was never about me. It was always about your dreams, your image. I'm not giving up my life to save yours." The room fell silent. My mom looked like she was about to cry, while my dad just stared at me, his jaw clenched. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a scared little kid trying to please them. I felt free. After that night, things in the house were never the same. My parents barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was curt and cold. I overheard them talking late one night, my mom sobbing about how I'd betrayed them, and my dad muttering that I was just like Anna. It hurt, but it also gave me clarity. They didn't love me. They loved the idea of me. And now that I was refusing to play my part, they didn't know what to do with me. I started spending more time away from home, throwing myself into my studies, and looking for ways to support myself. I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd have to leave, just like Anna did. But this time, I wanted to be ready. One evening, after another fight with my parents, I called Anna. "I think you were right," I admitted, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "They're never going to change." Anna didn't gloat or say, "I told you so." She just listened, her voice calm and steady. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Leo," she said, "but you don't have to let them drag you down. You can make a life for yourself, one that's not tied to their expectations." I wanted to believe her, but it was hard. Leaving felt like betrayal, even though I knew staying would only break me. "You're stronger than you think," Anna said as if sensing my doubts. "You just have to take the first step." That night I made a decision. I didn't know how or when, but I was going to get out. After my conversation with Anna, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something irreversible. I had made a silent decision to leave, but carrying it out was another matter entirely. For all the resentment I harbored toward my parents, the thought of cutting ties filled me with guilt and fear. What would they say? Would I regret leaving? Could I really handle life on my own? Still, deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before I had no choice. My parents were becoming more unhinged as the financial strain worsened. The family business had never been successful to begin with, but now it was falling apart completely. They were desperate, clinging to their art, and their crumbling reputation as if it was the only thing keeping them afloat. Unfortunately, their desperation became my burden. My parents' new favorite pastime was blaming me for their problems. They acted as though my refusal to drop out of school and dedicate myself to their failing business was the sole reason for their struggles. "Leo, if you weren't so selfish, we wouldn't be in this position," my dad snapped one night after a long, tense silence over dinner. "Selfish?" I repeated, unable to keep my voice steady. "I've been helping you for years. I've done everything you've asked. I can't save your business, and it's not my job to try." "You wouldn't talk like that if Anna hadn't poisoned your mind," my mom shot back, her voice rising. "You've changed, Leo. You're not the son we raised." The irony was staggering. They weren't mad because I'd changed. They were mad because I'd finally started seeing things for what they were. I was no longer their puppet, blindly following orders and believing their lies. For the first time, I was questioning them, and it terrified them. That fight was a turning point. From then on, I knew I couldn't stay much longer. My parents' anger only escalated, and I felt like I was walking on eggshells every moment I was home. It all came to a head on a rainy afternoon when my dad burst into my room, waving an envelope in his hand. "Explain this," he barked, shoving it toward me. I took it, confused, and realized it was a financial aid letter from my college. I had applied for additional aid to help cover my tuition and living costs, and the letter confirmed I'd been approved. "What's the problem?" I asked cautiously. "The problem?" he spat. "You're taking money from strangers while we're drowning? How dare you?" "It's not your money," I said, my frustration building. "This has nothing to do with you." He slammed his fist onto my desk, making me flinch. "You're abandoning us, Leo, just like your sister. Do you think you're better than us? Do you think you can just leave and let this family fall apart?" "Yes!" The word burst out of me before I could stop it. "I'm not responsible for you, Dad. You've spent my whole life treating me like a tool instead of a person, and I'm done. I'm not sacrificing my future for your mistakes." The silence that followed was deafening. My dad stared at me like I was a stranger, his face red with fury. My mom appeared in the doorway, her expression a mix of shock and disappointment. "You're just like her," my dad finally said, his voice low and cold. "Ungrateful, selfish. You're no son of mine." For a moment, his words stung. But then I thought about Anna, how she had survived being cast out, how she had built a life for herself despite everything they had done to her. If being like Anna meant refusing to let them control me any longer, then I was proud of it. That night, I packed a bag. I couldn't stay another day in that house. My parents' anger had reached a boiling point, and I was done being the scapegoat for their failures. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I had saved up a little money from odd jobs, and I knew exactly who to call. "Anna," I said when she picked up the phone, "I need to get out of here." Her response was immediate. "Where are you? I'll come get you." Hearing those words nearly broke me. For so long, I had felt like I had no one, like I was trapped, suffocating under my parents' expectations. But now, for the first time, I had someone on my side. Anna arrived the next day. My parents were at one of their art fairs, so I slipped out of the house with my bag and met her down the street. Seeing her again after all those years was surreal. She looked different, stronger, more confident, but her eyes were still kind and familiar. "You okay?" she asked softly as I climbed into her car. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if I was okay or not. "Let's just go." As we drove away, I didn't look back. Anna took me to her apartment, a small but comfortable space that felt more like a home than my parents' house ever had. She made me tea and let me sit quietly for a while, giving me space to process everything. "You don't have to talk about it yet," she said, sitting across from me. "But when you're ready, I'm here." Her kindness was almost overwhelming. I had spent so long believing that I wasn't worth caring about, that I was only valuable as long as I was useful. But Anna didn't see me that way. She didn't expect anything from me except for me to be myself. Over the next few weeks, Anna helped me start putting my life back together. She let me stay with her while I figured out my next steps, and she even helped me apply for jobs so I could start supporting myself. At first, I felt guilty for relying on her. "You shouldn't have to do all this for me," I told her one day. "Leo," she said firmly, "this isn't a burden. You're my brother. I'm doing for you what I wish someone had done for me." Her words stayed with me. For so long, I had believed my parents' lies, that asking for help was weakness, that family was a burden to bear. But Anna showed me that family could also be love, support, and understanding. About a month after I left, a letter arrived at Anna's apartment. It was from my parents. I stared at the envelope for a long time, debating whether or not to open it. Anna sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to read it if you don't want to," she said. "I think I need to," I replied. The letter was short and to the point. My parents wrote that they were struggling, that they were disappointed in me, and that they hoped I would come to my senses and return home to help them. They ended it with a single line that sent a chill down my spine. "Family is all you have." I folded the letter and set it aside. "They don't get it," I said quietly. "They never will," Anna replied, and for the first time, I was okay with that. In the weeks that followed, something shifted inside me. I stopped feeling guilty about leaving, and I started feeling proud. Proud that I had chosen myself. Proud that I was finally free of their manipulation. Anna was right. Family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up for you. My parents had never truly shown up for me, but Anna had. And now, it was my turn to build a life for myself, one that wasn't defined by their failures. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back. Life after leaving my parents' house wasn't easy, but for the first time, I felt like I had control over my own future. Living with Anna gave me a sense of stability I'd never had before. Her small apartment, cluttered with books and mementos from her own hard-fought journey, became a sanctuary where I could start rebuilding myself. Anna was patient in ways I hadn't expected. She didn't push me to talk about my past or force me to follow any specific plan. Instead, she gave me space to process everything at my own pace. But she also offered guidance when I needed it, sharing lessons she had learned the hard way during her years of struggle. The first priority was finding a job. I was hesitant at first, worried that I didn't have much to offer, but Anna reminded me that everyone starts somewhere. With her help, I put together a simple resume and began applying for anything I could find. After a few weeks of searching, I landed a part-time position at a local coffee shop. The job was far from glamorous, but I found solace in its routine. I learned to brew coffee, take orders, and handle difficult customers, all while earning my own money for the first time. It felt good to contribute to my own life, to start chipping away at the years of dependence that my parents had instilled in me. Anna encouraged me to take small steps toward independence. She taught me how to budget, helped me open my own bank account, and even showed me how to cook a few basic meals. Every small achievement felt monumental, like I was proving to myself that I was capable of standing on my own. Just as I was starting to feel like I was moving forward, my parents found a way to drag me back into their chaos. One afternoon, while I was cleaning up at the coffee shop, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it immediately. It was my dad. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity, and perhaps a lingering sense of obligation, got the better of me. I stepped outside and answered. "Leo?" My dad's voice was sharp, almost accusatory. "We need to talk." "What's going on?" I asked cautiously, already bracing myself for the worst. He wasted no time launching into a tirade about how difficult things had been since I left. He spoke about unpaid bills, declining sales, and the possibility of losing the house. His tone was laced with frustration, as if I were somehow to blame for all of it. "We need your help," he said finally, his voice softening in a way that felt unnatural. "You're doing well now, aren't you? It's time you stepped up for the family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For years, my parents had treated me like an accessory, a second thought in their world of artistic delusion. And now, after everything they'd done, they were asking me to bail them out. "I can't help you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." My dad's anger flared immediately. "We raised you. We sacrificed for you. You owe us, Leo." "I don't owe you anything," I replied firmly. "You kicked me out when I needed you most. You can't come crawling back now and expect me to fix everything." I hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking, and I had to take a few deep breaths to calm down. It wasn't just the call itself that rattled me. It was the realization that even after all these years, my parents hadn't changed. They still saw me as a tool to be used, not as a person. That phone call was a turning point. For so long, I had carried a sense of responsibility for my parents' well-being, even as they had neglected mine. But now, I understood that their struggles were not mine to bear. When I told Anna about the call, she nodded knowingly. "They're desperate," she said, "but you don't have to let their desperation control your life. You've worked too hard to get where you are." Her words gave me strength. Over the next few weeks, I braced myself for more attempts from my parents to reach out, and they didn't disappoint. They sent emails filled with guilt-tripping language, accusing me of abandoning them. My mom even tried calling Anna, hoping to bypass me altogether. But Anna shut her down without hesitation, refusing to let them manipulate their way back into my life. Eventually, I stopped responding altogether. It wasn't easy. It went against every instinct I'd been conditioned to follow, but it was necessary. I needed to focus on my own growth, not their demands. As the months passed, I began to feel more secure in my new life. The coffee shop job gave me a steady income, and I started saving for the future. With Anna's encouragement, I also enrolled in a few classes at the local community college, exploring subjects I was genuinely interested in for the first time. It was in one of those classes, a writing workshop, that I discovered a passion I hadn't realized I had. The instructor was a kind but demanding woman who pushed me to dig deep and tell my own story. For the first time, I started putting my experiences into words, processing the pain and growth that had shaped me. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to make sense of everything I had been through. It helped me see that my parents' neglect didn't define me, and neither did their attempts to manipulate me. I was more than the golden child, more than the scapegoat. I was my own person, with my own dreams and goals. Through it all, Anna remained my rock. She celebrated my successes, comforted me during setbacks, and reminded me that I didn't have to go through life alone. In her, I found the kind of family I had always wanted, not one based on obligation, but one built on love and support. We talked often about the past, about the ways our parents had hurt us, and the lessons we had learned. But we also looked forward, focusing on the future we were building for ourselves. Slowly but surely, we were creating lives that were free from the shadow of our upbringing. And for the first time in years, I felt hopeful. Let me know if you'd like me to continue or expand.